All right. Morning, everyone. I'm Alex Roberts from Linklaters, so international law firm. Apologies, but I thought I'd go without a PPT to try and be a bit more fun. I didn't put my full suit and tie on, again, to be fun. From what I say, you'll realise that I'm not fun at all, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Marion, for having me. Kay, of course. I won't say how long we've known each other because it will be embarrassing. But pleasure. As Marion said, I'm happy to take questions. Let's do it afterwards, after the camera is off, although I might say one or two controversial things while the camera's on if I'm not careful. I don't have a PPT, so I'll freestyle a little bit, but let's see where we get to. So I'm a dad of 1 month, just had a little daughter, February the 8th. It was International Women's Day, obviously earlier in the week. So I now appreciate what it is to be a woman, to be a mother, more than ever before. We have a few ladies in the audience, so thank you for your contribution to the world. My wife had a cesarean, so I was actually doing most of the bottle feeding, the nappy changing, and I had no idea how hard it is to be a mum. So very appreciative. But also, it gave me a chance to learn or relearn how good technology can be. I have downloaded the best baby care app that I think is available in China. It tells me, record baby pooping time, baby weeing time, reminds me when I should feed the baby. It's quite incredible, but of course the amount of data that you have to put in about myself, about my wife, about my 1-month-old kid is actually quite scary as well. So this experience, trying to be a mum for the last month, has made me look at my job as a data and tech lawyer in a slightly different way, or enhanced the way that I look at it. And maybe some of those insights I can share with you over the next 15 minutes and then into the Q&A. So, I mean, as someone that's been working in tech and data law in China for the last 5-6 years or so, originally when I came to China, I did a little bit more on the investment side, as we just heard from the floor as well. But more and more, particularly with the continuing changes in the rules over the last few months and 18 months, I would say, almost all I've been doing is regulatory. Paperwork, advising people on how to structure, how to get out of the mess that we have with the Chinese rules. It's fair to say that China is not the only country in the world that's having a bit of a regulatory rebalance. I mean, the papers around the world call it a crackdown. Turn the camera off if I say crackdown too often, but it is definitely a sea change in terms of how the regulations are supervising the digital economy here, right? There are so many opportunities, but there also are the risks from the regulatory potential fines and sanctions that can be applied. Why is China doing this? I think it's important this is happening around the globe. In the US, in Europe, we see Digital Markets Acts in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's important always to think about the rationale here in China. From my perspective, I don't know if anyone came to TechCom last year. I like to put some of this down to the dual circulation strategy that President Xi has in making China a bit more sustainable. So basically controlling big tech. We've all seen what's happened with the big property developers. They've grown, great growth over the last 10 years, but then there's now risks for the economy because of them going out of control with the debt mountain that has been built. We saw with Ant Financial's IPO was actually pulled last year. Again, maybe getting to that stage where the big tech player was getting too big to fail. So a lot of these regulations that we're seeing, which are hitting the big players but actually filter down into everyday operation, I think are about control and sustainability of the market. And I think in the current climate of what we see in Moscow and Ukraine, actually, there's context here. China wants to be sustainable, have sustainable financial markets, sustainable fintech, renminbi, because should a geopolitical event happen in a few years, doesn't want the same sanctions that we now see happening in Russia. So all these regulations are a bigger strategy, is my personal view, not a Linklaters view for the camera, but there's some context there which I think is always important to think about. Because cybersecurity from a China perspective is always about national security, okay, and that's fundamental to think about. Some of you might well be from Europe, used to the GDPR. That's about privacy and individuals' rights. But in China, where we have cybersecurity, it's a different beast. It's about national security as well. So for those that don't deal in as much paperwork about cybersecurity and data as I do, let's just think about what the differences are. So from a China perspective as well, cybersecurity, and for those that aren't involved in it, is more about focusing on the protection of the kit, the IT infrastructure itself. We obviously have the example at the moment of DD, right? It's under a cybersecurity review and investigation for the last nine months. That's about investigating the setup of its infrastructure, its app. Are there any weaknesses? It's obviously carrying in its databases 92% of all ride hailers down the eastern seaboard. So if there's a breach, a hack, actually that could have an effect on national security. So I know we have some aspiring entrepreneurs here. Maybe a badge of honor for some of you should be to have a cybersecurity review at some point, because it shows the success of your business and that you've grown to such a stage. But having known some people that are going through it at DD, I wouldn't recommend it, because it's a not very transparent and it's a very difficult process that the company is going through at the moment. That's distinct from data protection, data privacy, in that data privacy is more about the individual's rights, right? The Chinese constitution gives us certain rights, but then last year we had the Personal Information Protection Law launched from November the 1st. And for the first time, we have a comprehensive data privacy law here, in the same way that we have in Europe with the GDPR. Individuals are basically empowered to approach companies to enforce their rights. They have access rights. You can ask for your information to be deleted. So to go back to the rationale that I've spoken about before, about this regulatory reboot, the rebalancing, the Chinese approach, how I like to visualize it, is a little bit, there's top down, so there's the big policies. We'll put in lots of investment into AI, 5G, semiconductors, but also there's a bottom up approach in this empowerment of individuals as well. So companies, unfortunately, we're being squished from both ends. So this market is particularly difficult when you look at it from a cyber and a data perspective. It's not just individuals having rights. We have the government squishing us from the top as well. But it's not all doom and gloom. The market is so vast, the amount of data that is here, for those that can navigate the difficult landscape, there's a lot of potential upside. So over the last few weeks, in terms of potential market entrants that I've been working with in my day job, actually medical devices is one of them. So we've been working with a US startup that they sell you little devices that you attach. It has a little, I don't want to say needle, it sounds awful, but something that just protrudes under the skin and allows you to read real time. You get a data feed on your phone, what your insulin levels are, so you know when to take your medication. You can send it to your doctor, whatever it is. So that's really catering for the change, if you like, in customer expectation that we've definitely seen with the pandemic. People want real-time data, they want access to it, they don't want to have to go to the hospital. So this sort of digital device, this sort of opportunity, a huge potential in the market here in China, particularly with the size of population. A fintech player. So 11 years ago in London, my hometown, there were a couple of entrepreneurs that started a fintech platform doing cross-border data, cross-border money flows. Basically, their app allows you to benchmark different banks, their exchange rates, how much it will cost you to transfer money across. They're now looking to enter the Chinese market. Obviously, fintech is huge here, but they need to navigate the different regulatory hurdles as to come in as a foreign player into the banking sector. Even if you sell yourself as a technology company, at the end you're dealing with money. So that's why they've come to us. But again, opportunity is there for those that come in the fintech space, the same as the healthcare space. But difficulties also present themselves. So if we go back to the cybersecurity aspects, for instance, we might not be subject to a cybersecurity review ourselves, but on a day-to-day basis, I don't know if anyone has heard of the MLPS, the multi-level protection scheme. Kevin is nodding, smiling. I don't know if smiling with just the awkwardness of the whole process. But in short, anyone that is launching an app as a company owner, any new website, any new kit that you buy should go through this MLPS, multi-level protection scheme, review process where you have to grade your IT infrastructure, send a report in theory to basically the local police, but nobody is doing this in Shanghai. The police don't care yet. But I sit on the committee of the British Chamber. We've heard reports about US companies who have had knocks on the door recently being asked about their data security situation since we had the data security law launched in September the 1st. Japanese companies also were taken for some training on data security. I mean, there's obviously some geopolitics about certain companies from certain countries being put aside, but it shows that in terms of enforcement and scrutiny, this is becoming more of a thing, and I think we'll all be doing MLPS reviews on a more steady basis. Cybersecurity also, unfortunately, comes in to play more and more in this market in terms of data breaches. I don't know if anyone has just been watching the press globally even. The number of ransomware attacks is up about 82% annually, year on year, last year. So again, unfortunately, when you get to a certain scale with your business, you become vulnerable to threat actors that want to get in, whether they want to get information, take a certain amount of personal information, and then basically hold you at ransom, whatever it is. This is becoming more and more prevalent as a business risk and something that we need to deal with through policies, practices, maybe working with third parties, et cetera, but a real practical example of how cybersecurity is becoming more and more of an issue for us, unfortunately, on the negative side. What I think is probably easier to understand, though, rather than the cybersecurity, which is all about tech, and I'll leave it to areas over there, day to day, what a lot of my work has been about over the last few weeks is the PIPL, so the Personal Information Protection Law, which came into force on November the 1st. I think this is really interesting in terms of both the difficulties for business, but also the opportunities. So it's basically a comprehensive, all singing, all dancing privacy law, right? It basically gives us all the right to have access to our data, whatever the company holds on us, but also puts obligations on the companies for the first time in a mandatory sense to tell us exactly what they're doing with our data, what data they are collecting, how they're processing it, who they're sharing it with, if there is any international element to the business, are they sending it overseas, and then potentially to get consents from us. Leave all of that jargon, of course, to the lawyers, boring as hell, but from a practical perspective, what it means is if we have an app, we suddenly need to start having more and more pop-ups. We need to explain to the users when they're inputting data exactly what we're doing with it. So I don't know anyone that was here around November when this law came into force. You might have noticed that you get more pop-ups asking you to consent to more collection of your data. That obviously impacts the user experience, right? It slows down you actually getting to the products and the services that you want. But if you don't do it, then there's a 50 million RMB fine waiting for you. So it's all about getting it right. So a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last few months is working with the web designer, the app designer, the marketing and sales guy, the function in the business, obviously the in-house legal. Top management also often gets involved, and actually trying to redesign that whole customer experience in a compliant way. Maybe you don't have the longest privacy statement at the start of the launch of your app, but because some of the data processing activities will come later, you move some of the legal jargon later. Some users might not get to that, but again, less disruption to the UX, the user experience. But actually, and so navigating that, getting it right, can actually give you quite a competitive advantage against the guy that just slaps up the longest legal disclaimer at the front end of the app. So real life business being affected by lots of small print in legal statutes that we have here in China. Unfortunately, we have the PIPL in force since November the 1st, but as just speaking to Kevin before, we don't have the data transfer regulations. We don't have lots and lots of guidance. It goes down to a granular level to make it easier, an operational level to understand how we comply with these rules. There's a little bit of trial and error, making inquiries with the regulators, seeing what others are doing in the market. So I don't know if you, for instance, if you use the Zara app, the H&M app, you can see that they've added checkboxes. Should we as businesses, because we have a similar business model, follow that so we're not the outlier? A lot of the work I've been doing is with big international hotels. So you imagine the difficulties there is if you have a Chinese citizen that's booking a hotel in the US, should the user experience in your platform be the same as if a non-Chinese citizen who's not subject to our laws in China be the same or different? How do you marry that up? If the Chinese website is, should it be different to the English language website? There's a whole myriad of different options, configurations when you're looking at the tech where your server is, but that user experience and making it as smooth as possible and the same for everyone is one of the key things that businesses, at least that I've been working with, are trying to get through at the moment.